Hey ladies, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, I'm Aisha. I'm a certified trauma-informed coach, and I'm on a mission to help 1 million women become their most confident and successful selves with the use of law of assumption manifestation. If you have not yet subscribed, hit the button and tap the bell icon to be notified. That way you never miss out on powerful tips, inspiring stories, and essential guidance so that you too can manifest the life of your dreams. Let's get into today's video. I had an entirely different agenda planned today, but my energy was calling me to do some different things, and I had to rearrange my schedule and sort of just let my intuition lead. This is something that I do as a woman moving more and more into her feminine energy, which I highly recommend for all of you watching to try that out, but that is not the topic of today's video. While I was out driving, I felt this really strong call from the divine to make this video. So rather than filming the one that I had in mind, I'm gonna film this one, and I know this is because one of you out there specifically manifested it. And I have not gotten a comment, I have not gotten an email, or anybody that I've coached, nobody has specifically requested this. But I know and I trust that if you are here watching this, you manifested this specific video from me as a coach. So we're going to be talking about manifesting sobriety. And I have to preface this, anytime I talk about my past, I am a revert. So I only reverted last year. Anything that happened before then, okay, I had a very full life. I had a lot of misguided decisions, and I did not have a lot of structure to keep me from making, mistakes or poor decisions or exercising ill judgment in those ways. So when I do get into my past, just know that I am no longer that version of myself, and proudly so. So let my life be an example for you. If you are struggling with using alcohol, smoking cigarettes or vaping, using marijuana or any other types of substances, I know it can be really challenging. I know it can feel really hard. It can feel like you're hopeless when it comes to quitting. We hear a lot of narratives about, oh, it's so hard to quit smoking. It's so hard to quit drinking. We hear a lot of people say how lonely it feels to not be able to go out with your girlfriends as a single person because all of your girlfriends drink, and so on and so forth. And of course, I'm also speaking from an American perspective, so that's just what a lot of Americans do, is like, once it gets past like 5-6 p.m., there's not really much open and available for you to socialize outside of like bars and clubs, or even just restaurants that happen to serve alcohol or have a bar within the restaurant. And this can be really difficult in terms of temptation. So I completely understand if that's where you're at in life. But if you really do have the intention to sober up, to stop using those substances, I have full faith that you can and you will accomplish that goal. Now, I was exposed from a very early age to alcohol and tobacco use. I didn't really experience exposure to marijuana super early, but definitely in my teens was like a really big thing. And I actually had my first experience consuming alcohol at about 8 years old, and by age 11 I had a lot of access to it, so it was a pretty prevalent habit of mine. I wasn't like getting super crazy inebriated. However, I did have access from that age all the way until I was legal drinking age. So my experience with it was very early, it was very young. I was an adolescent. I did not have any understanding of the impacts that alcohol use could have on the brain and the body and the emotions and our actions and behaviors. And I also was exposed, like I said, to tobacco use very early, although I did not start using it personally until high school. I believe my first time I was 14, which I know it's like, it's so weird for me to talk about, like, that this is my life, but that's my truth. That was my experience growing up. And obviously, like, I'm a very different person now. I've since chosen to walk away from that type of lifestyle and chosen not to use those substances. However, I do have to admit that as early as this year, I did use certain substances, legal substances. We're not going to get into it, but I have since chosen that that's not who I want to be. And of course, like, again, coming to a religion that really holds the body in high regard and holds the spirit in high regard, I understand why we are to refrain from those substances. So it's not a moral failing. It's about treating your body with pure intentions and treating yourself with love and kindness. And oftentimes these substances, and when I say substances, I mean even, alcohol as well. It is still a drug, even though it's a legal drug. Same thing as tobacco it's a legal drug, but it's still a drug. When we use these types of things, we are not being our truest self. And oftentimes what we're actually doing is trying to suppress something within ourselves, usually an emotion, sometimes a memory, and possibly trauma as well. Usually it's coming from a place of dysregulation. So when we're unable to regulate ourselves, either regulate our nervous system or regulate our emotions, we then go out to seek these substances because these substances are numbing, or they're distracting, or they are invigorating in a way that stimulates us in a different direction than the pain and discomfort that we are feeling towards our circumstances or our lived experiences. So just know that addiction doesn't come from desiring the substance. It comes from trying to avoid whatever pain or heaviness that life is bringing you. And it is only one method of distraction. So if you just happen to be watching this because somebody else you love uses substances, or just out of curiosity, just know that food is a substance we use to numb. Social media is a consumption mechanism that we use to numb. Gossip as well is something that we use to numb and distract. Television, music, anything that really takes our brain away from the pain that we are avoiding can be considered numbing and distracting and suppressing behaviors. So this is not something that any of us is truly immune to as a human species. And I don't want anybody watching this to feel guilt or shame towards themselves for choosing substances. We make those decisions before we realize what detriment it is to us. We make those decisions before we can accept the reality of whatever situation it is that we are pushing away from. And we make these decisions before we have the right tools and proper coping mechanisms to make better choices. Okay, so this is not about shame, this is not about guilt. Now, again, I started using these substances at quite a young age, off and on. It wasn't every day, it was here and there, it was with friends, it was while I was socializing in my friend groups because I hung out with older people for most of my life. I've just always gotten along better with older people. I know a lot of people on the spectrum and with ADHD can relate to that. And so I had access, and I also had family who used tobacco and drank openly and freely. Again, I did not come from a Muslim family, so I didn't have very strict rules at home to have an example showing me what the right way to live is. And I do say right way from my current perspective. I don't particularly think that using substances is wrong on a moral level, but on a spiritual level, it's not necessary, and therefore it is a sin, because a sin just means to miss the mark. It misses the mark of this experience. It's not hitting the target. The target is to have a bold relationship with yourself and a strong relationship to your higher power, and to develop yourself to be the best being you can be, all of which cannot be done with the use of certain substances. So when it comes to actually beating the addiction, the first thing that I would focus on is like, why do I want to quit? Let me think about the reasons. I know that I wanted to quit drinking because I just did not like who I was. Like, I do not like who I am when I drink. I don't like how fearful I am. I don't like how anxious I am. And a lot of people who have anxiety tend to drink to calm the anxiety. It amplifies it for me. So I end up really anxious, really fearful. It strongly impairs my judgment, and I do not like that. I do not like feeling inebriated, feeling like I'm not in complete control. I'm not autonomous in my decision making. And so the reasons for not drinking became bigger and bigger and bigger. Of course, there's the bloating, the weight gain, how it affects your sleep and your hormones, that icky feeling the next day where you're dehydrated and your body just doesn't quite feel right because it's recovering from drinking. Even if you've only had like a couple of drinks, like it just feels gross to me, and I don't want to feel that way anymore. So that was a huge part of me making that decision. Same thing goes for cigarettes, and even vaping. Like, it would make my chest feel tight. I would have like a lot of mucus, which was really gross. And like, I hated the smell of cigarettes. I hated that it was like expensive. It's an expensive habit when you are addicted, especially because you can't go a day without it. So you're like constantly going towards that. And I hated, particularly with cigarettes, I hated how weak it made me feel when I felt like I couldn't say no to buying another pack. I really hated how, again, it goes back to that autonomy. I felt like it had power over me. I felt like I couldn't resist it. And I would tell myself, like, I don't need it. I don't really want to smoke. I know it's going to make me feel gross. It's going to make me feel sick. I'm going to get a stomach ache. But for some reason, that driving factor, that habitual factor was there. And I couldn't break through it for a while. And so one thing that really, really helped me, more so with cigarettes than with alcohol, quitting was a much easier decision for me. And I think this is because it takes quite a bit of alcohol use and exposure to develop an alcohol addiction, whereas a nicotine addiction is much quicker and much easier to form. So on a physiological level, on a physical level, kicking the habit of drinking was much easier of a decision and commitment to make, whereas quitting cigarettes was definitely harder. Now, what helped me with cigarettes the most, and you can apply this to whatever substance you're using, is like every time I would hold that cigarette and I would smoke, I would look at it, I would stare at it, and I would just like look at it like, you have no power over me. And sometimes I would say it if I was by myself, and like not with anybody around, because that would be kind of awkward to do. But I would look at it and I would go, you have no power over me, right? I would look at it sternly from a place of authority and tell it, you have no power over me. Whatever is in here that I subconsciously think is making me choose it, no, you don't have that kind of power over me. I refuse to give you that power. I refuse to let you control me anymore. I refuse to give my autonomy over to you as a substance. And this really helped me to get into that headspace of, quitting can be easy because I can decide that it's easy. And that was the other affirmation I used outside of saying to the object itself, you have no power over me, was quitting is so easy. And that's actually something I remember when I was about 19 and I was smoking again. I would tell myself that. I'm like, oh yeah, quitting is so easy. I can quit anytime. Like, quitting is so easy. I just never allowed myself to have that narrative of quitting is hard, despite the fact that my parents and friends and family definitely affirmed that. I know a lot of other people I met have affirmed that. I know it's a very common narrative that quitting cigarettes is hard, quitting smoking is hard. I just didn't adopt that belief. And if you do have that belief, all you have to do is rewire it by saying, no, quitting is easy. And it's not going to feel easy. It's not going to be easy at first, okay? But again, affirm and persist. This is the principle of manifestation. So if you truly are committed to quitting, you have to change that narrative. So now quitting is easy. It's so easy to make the choice to choose your health over using this substance. It's so easy to choose your dean and your beliefs, your God and your spirituality, than it is like it's so easy to choose that over being cool or like socializing with a specific group of people, and having to give that up, because sometimes you can be shunned from your group of friends if they're not prepared to see your perspective that being sober is the better choice. And so it really comes down to changing how you relate to that substance. And the other thing that helped me, so I definitely struggled with a food. I hate to call it a food addiction. It was an emotional eating scenario, where when I was younger, and that's actually how I gained all that weight, that's how I ended up being 222 pounds at my highest weight, is I was an emotional eater. I would get really stressed and I would go have a snack, and I'd get really overwhelmed and dysregulated and I would go eat something, and it was a self-soothing behavior, and that's what addiction is. It is a self-soothing behavior. So I had to understand, why am I trying to soothe myself? What is stressing me out? What is making me anxious? What is making me uncomfortable? What is making me insecure that I feel like I need to reach for a drink or have a cigarette? Like, what is it in me that is making me feel the drive, the push to suppress one situation and replace it with another experience so that I don't have to feel that icky situation? And this was like journaling and self-reflection and just trying to understand and get in tune with who I truly am at my core, that helped me to unfold and unlock what was actually happening. And of course it was insecurity. Of course it was stress. Of course it was emotional and nervous system dysregulation that I didn't have the skill yet to conquer. And so knowing that that was the cause, I had to choose, okay, not only am I gonna reduce or, in the end quit using these substances, I need to replace them with better coping mechanisms. This can be going for a walk. This can be journaling. This can be, listening to a song super loud over and over and over again, just to like drown out whatever the feeling is. It's okay to suppress your feelings until you're ready to face them. What's not okay is to continue to suppress them and never face them. And this is where the cycle of addiction leads, this is how it develops. Sorry, my nose is like, it's really bugging. Okay. The cycle of addiction develops because something at some point in time happens in our circumstances that feels really heavy, and it feels like a lot of pressure, and it feels very stressful and painful and heavy. And so what we do is we don't have the tools to handle it. We don't have the proper outlets or channels to move that energy, so we have no other choice but to numb it. We have no other choice but to cover it with a different feeling. And that's when we reach for the substances and the habits that take us away from that headspace. The issue is when we don't ever return to it to figure it out, right? So a lot of times addiction can start after a very traumatic incident. This could be a near-death experience. This could be the loss of a very close loved one. I know a lot of people turn to alcohol in grieving periods, bereavement periods, where they've lost someone tremendously close to them, either a parent or a child or a sibling, or a partner. And it's again, it is not a moral failing. It is not that you're not a good person. It's not that you have poor self-control, and it's not that you have a lack of love and respect for yourself. It's none of those things, okay? And I want to make sure that that's very clear, that this is not a matter of you're a bad person because you chose substances. This is a matter of you didn't have the right tools to fix the situation, to get yourself to a more level and even-keeled state of being. And that's okay. We don't have the tools when we're born. We don't have anything when we're born outside of our natural faith and our natural instincts. And it takes years to learn and develop into a successful and healthy and balanced human being. And especially if you came from a childhood home that didn't provide that for you. I really, really want you to know that you can't know what you don't know until you become aware. until you discover information, including different modalities of therapy and changing your mindset and manifestation, you can't get any further than the tools you currently have can take you. You can't, if you only have a hammer and nails, you can't build an entire house, right? You're gonna at some point need wrenches for the plumbing. You're gonna at some point need screwdrivers for the electrical outlets and installing the boxes. And at some point you're gonna need, whatever other fittings that take to fully make a house complete, right? Like the spatulas for the drywall. Like, this is what I mean by you need to grow your toolbox, okay? Because we're born with an empty toolbox pretty much. Our skill is crying. And we cry for everything. We cry when we are hungry, when we are tired, when we are lonely, when we are cold, when we are wet, when we are soiled. Like, that's our only tool, is crying. And then we develop more tools. We develop speech and other body language and so on and so forth. So like, you have to understand that, again, this is not a failing on your part. This is just a new pathway for you to discover and unlock what it does take, what it will take from you to overcome whatever addiction you're facing. I do not want this video to get too long, and I pretty much have covered everything that there is to cover, but just know that it's no different. Manifesting sobriety, manifesting quitting substances, or ending a food addiction or any type of addiction, it's all the same. Understand why you're going there. Why is that the habit? Understand what you're avoiding by using those substances to numb or distract yourself. And then understand why you don't want to have that habit anymore. Is it, because of your faith? Is it because of your health, your physical health, your mental health? Is it for a family member because a family member cares about you and wants you to be the healthiest version of yourself? You have to have a good why. And then you just persist. You just persist in changing your mindset, changing your relationship to that thing, and building your tool set so that at some point it becomes easy. At some point it becomes such a no-brainer, natural thing to be like, oh yeah, no, I'm not a smoker. I am not a drinker, or I am not someone who partakes in alcohol. Like, I am not someone who uses substances. And that new identity that you adopt eventually solidifies into who you actually are. And then your habits, of course, conform to that. So thank you so much. And I am praying for whoever manifested this video from me. I know it can feel hard, but just because it feels hard doesn't mean that you can't do it. And just because it feels hard today doesn't mean that it won't feel easy tomorrow. So keep persisting, keep going, keep praying. And thank you so much for being part of my community here. I really appreciate you. And I will catch you in the next one. Bye.